With Lululemon, the real gift happens when they're living in it. When you give them the coziest scuba matching set, the real gift is this. And this. And this. This holiday, Lululemon makes it easy to give a gift that goes beyond. Open the moment. Shop now at Lululemon.com.
His code name's Jackal. He's an exceptional assassin.
Streaming now on Peacock.
He will kill again, unless we stop him.
Academy Award winner Eddie Redmayne.
You're paying me to kill him. I am charging you for getting away.
The Jackal's here. Look at the exits.
BAFTA Award winner Lashana Lynch.
I will find him, and I will kill him myself.
I like to win.
So do I.
The Day of the Jackal. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
Under the mountain, Feyre is confronted by nightmares on all sides. Against Alice's advice, Feyre makes bargains with Amarantha and Rhysand, the two most terrifying Fae, in an effort to liberate Tamlin and the Spring Court. But when Tamlin will not so much as look at her, the sacrifice of her own safety and ultimately her life begins to shift her perception of the man she loves.
The views expressed by the hosts are entirely their own and in no way represent the thoughts or intentions of the original author. This podcast is a discussion shared to spark thought and conversation on the characters and themes of this novel.
Though the hosts speak mostly within the constraints of this book, series spoilers may be discussed with or without warning. Explicit language as well as themes of sex, violence, abuse, and depression will reoccur throughout the podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk, a podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels.
This season, we are exploring Sarah J. Maas's most controversial novel in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. This is Jack.
And I'm Amy, and this week we're discussing chapters 33 through 37 in A Court of Thorns and Roses. As we begin our journey under the mountain, we ask, as a reader, do we have faith in Feyre?
Additionally, we ask ourselves, do we believe Tamlin has done all that he can to protect Feyre?
Themes we'll see include mirroring of events that we have encountered previously in the novel.
Other themes will include the loss of identity. Ooh.
So as we enter chapter 33, a lot of the plot that takes place in these chapters and the rest of the book are really the last act of the book. And instead of focusing on plot, we're going to focus this episode and for our remaining episodes on things such as the continuation of themes that we've already established, the setup of events for subsequent books in this series, specifically the breakdown and buildup of relationships, as well as Feyre's last moments as a human.
R.I.P. Human Feyre.
R.I.P.
Gone too soon. When we go into Human Feyre, into this next chapter, we left off with her going into the mountain. And it was very scary and exciting. And there are some key parts, I would say 3 parts, that of her mindset that we need to keep in mind. Keep in mind. The first being, Feyre knows that she's likely going to die. She accepts this from the get-go. She knows that her odds are pretty slim to none. And she's also determined to fight. She has her weapons. She tells Alice, I will free him. And she's not going to go down without swinging. And then the biggest one is she misunderstands the serial. So several times up to this point, she has quoted the serial. We've referenced it. And she says, stay with the High Lord, the serial had said. Stay with him. Fall in love with him, and all would be righted. He did not say that to her.
No, the serial did not say that.
She's starting to make up things. And this begs the question of what does this mean for her mentally? So she's ready to fight and die for Tamlin. And when the first time she sees him, he's going to ignore her. So she's in it. She's got hands. She's ready to throw down. And I think she's expecting Tamlin to do the same when he sees her.
Absolutely. I think when she's in any situation that requires her to survive, she'll fight for survival. And she expects the same from those around her, even though I think her life experience has taught her otherwise, if you think about her sisters, right?
Yeah.
But she has stepped away from that pessimistic view of the world, and I think goes into this optimistic. And we as readers are also optimistic. I mean, she's our heroine. Of course, everything's going to be fine.
But we need to believe it too. I think she equates like the need to survive with respect, because even though she's made peace with her sisters, they were never fighting to survive. So she's never really respected them.
Right.
And I think that, I mean, we'll go into it more, but does she respect Tamlin by the end of this? I don't know. We'll have to talk about it. But before we talk about it, there's other things to talk about.
So before Feyre ventures under the mountain, Alice gives her a warning. And it's a callback to this idea of fairy wine being dangerous. Alice specifically tells Feyre to not drink the fairy wine because it's not like what they had at Solstice. However, Feyre's had a lot of positive experiences being with the Fae. And so her human instinct to avoid fairy wine has kind of been broken down by those experiences. And I think that this is an important point because as we venture under the mountain, everything we understand of the Fae world is going to be challenged. And we and Feyre have to reacquire our own instincts to protect us in this new environment.
Alice also warns her about Tamlin. On 291, she says, and most of all, don't trust anyone in there, not even your Tamlin. And I love that Alice says that, because a little bit of a throwback to Amy's previous note in the chapter/episode before is Alice went from calling him Tamlin to the High Lord as if when referencing how he threw up at the sight of Lucian and his eye missing. And, there's kind of question on whether Alice respects Tamlin or not. And I think in this one, she knows what Feyre's going to find, and that's a very complacent, fake High Lord.
You know what's really interesting that I didn't say when we were discussing our notes is that Alice calls him your Tamlin. So there is Tamlin, and then there is your Tamlin. Alice is telling Feyre, don't trust your Tamlin.
Yeah.
So basically, don't trust any side of Tamlin because he's not there for you.
He's not going to be there. Alice knows. She's a bit of a bitch, but she knows.
Yeah, she could have done more. She could have done more.
Yes.
Before Feyre makes the final descent, we also get a callback to a recurring image. Remember, this is where this idea of mirrors and mirroring events comes in. Feyre identifies herself as a starving doe in winter, the same as the one she hunted in chapter 1. She says specifically, I was good as a starving doe ripping bark off a tree in a clearing, which is something we physically see in chapter 1. And although she just described herself as a hunter hunting fairies just a page before, she also subconsciously knows that she is the prey going in.
In these chapters of her under the mountain, Feyre, really swings back and forth between being the hunter and being the prey. Throughout the whole book, I would argue that Feyre is always known when she's the hunter and when she's the prey. It's one of the qualities that we love about her. She's very self-aware. But now she starts to swing. It's a pendulum. Is she going to die or is she going to kill?
And I think that's a really good point to bring up because we as readers begin to doubt her because she doubts herself. Even though I just said she's the heroine, of course everything will work out.
Yeah, but it's Sarah J. Maas doing this as a writing device where, the heroine questions herself. We subconsciously question the heroine, even though we all know it's going to work out.
What also comes with this territory is that Feyre compounds guilt and trauma. And we're going to see this throughout the rest of this act in the book. And we started seeing it in the human world chapters, but what we see here is something I think we can all identify with. She begins to regret not being honest about her feelings. And she specifically thinks, if I had stayed, if I had admitted what I'd felt, none of this would have happened. And really, honestly, this is just the baseline. We've all experienced this, and it's only going to escalate more to be beyond what a reader maybe can comprehend. But I think it's really important that her guilt starts at a level we do understand and we can empathize with.
I empathize, I understand, but it still hurts me. Stop taking on so much guilt, Feyre.
Yeah, taking on guilt for something she's not really accountable for is typical Feyre, and we're going to continue to see it.
So Feyre. That's just so Feyre. So whenever we like write out our notes, we like to have like little chapters at the beginning of them, call outs, and I just, the fall of Tamlin, the very long fall.
Tamlin.
Tamlin. Why do I keep calling him Tamlin?
Yes.
Oh my God. The fall of Tamlin. I don't know where that R is coming from. So when Feyre sees Tamlin, he still resembles the warrior she once knew, but now it's painfully obvious just how useless he is. And that's one thing I've always been calling out, is just how useless his warrior look has always been. And now it is in full force. She says he was still wearing that golden mask, still wearing his warrior's clothes, that baldric, even though there were no knives sheathed along it, and not a single weapon anywhere on him, no claws, no fangs. He just stared at me, unfeeling, unmoved, unimpressed. And, I think you could say that Feyre excuses the first half of not having the knives, not having any swords, but she also points out that he doesn't have claws or fangs, and that's something that Amarantha can't take away. Like, those are on him. He can pull those out.
And how disappointing must that be for Feyre? He's not even trying to escape. He's resigned to his fate, very much like Feyre was resigned to her fate at the very beginning of the book. But she's come here to fight, and that energy's not being matched at all.
I mean, when you start hindsighting everything, as we've been doing, like, I'm sure Feyre eventually will have those thoughts of, he really just set himself up for failure here.
Yeah, well, and also, I think it's important that the golden mask is observed at the same time as the clothes and the baldric, because it's all a facade. It's a facade of a warrior, but it's not, he doesn't embody the warrior.
It also, you could say that the golden mask is representative of a collar, and he still has his collar on next to his master, Amarantha.
Yep, excellent point.
Thank you.
After she notices Tamlin, Feyre also notices Clare Beddor, and this is where guilt starts to compound on top of Feyre. She realizes that Amarantha has taken Clare Beddor and tortured her. And this is where Feyre starts thoughts such as, I had as good as killed Clare. I'd saved my own life and damned her. That rotting body on the wall should be mine. Mine. And again, she's taking accountability for other people's actions, but because she gave the name Clare Beddor, she feels like it's her fault. What's sad here is that Feyre will continue to make choices with fatal consequences for which she will continue to feel accountable. And I feel like this is another mirror, but with some differences. So Andros's death up until this point has haunted her and it has bothered her. But upon learning the truth about the motives of Andros being out in the forest and being out there to die, it's kind of absolved her of that guilt. And she hasn't really thought about him since. Clare's death, on the other hand, will really never wash away from her hands because... Jacqueline?
I don't know. I mean, sorry, you want to finish your point?
No, go ahead.
We talked about this before when we, pre-discussed this, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that when Alice explained how Andros died and why Andros died, I think there's more logic behind it. I don't think Feyre is the kind of person to ever absolve herself from it or allow other people to absolve her. And I would say that there might be more rationalizing and more reason, but she would still cling on to his death. But, that's the beauty of literature, baby. We can interpret it however we want.
I agree with you that Feyre would never allow herself to be absolved, but I think others have absolved her in their minds. So, like, Lucien and Alice don't love her for what has happened, but they don't, especially Lucien, who starts out prickly.
Yeah. Has anyone blamed her for any death? I don't think anyone has blamed her at all for anything.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. My point. So nobody blames her for anything that's happened thus far. But, I wonder to what extent she blames other people. She's perfectly capable of blaming herself. But there's a passage that caught my eye that made me question, does Feyre briefly resent Tamlin for all that's happened? And on page 299, it reads, I stared blankly at Tamlin. He'd let them kill Clare like that to keep them from knowing that I was alive. My eyes stung as bile burned my throat.
You told me earlier that the first time you read the book, you interpreted that as pity.
Yeah, so...
I say that so accusatory. You said that.
Well, I forget the example from the last episode, but it's when Rhysand makes Tamlin bow, and she talks about how it fills her with rage. And it comes across in that passage, and I think the first time I read this, as a righteous rage of like, how dare this situation be forced upon Tamlin and Feyre. And I think that's how I read it the first time. But when I reread it, I was like, oh, Sarah J. Maas knew what she was doing. She kept it vague intentionally. She doesn't tell us what Feyre feels in this moment. She just describes her physiological reaction. And I think that's on purpose.
Well, there's a key 2 words in here that to me drives home that Feyre does blame him. He'd let them. So that, let someone, like, that implies ownership. And, to your point, yes, I don't think that Sarah J. Maas let Feyre dive into those feelings too much because, as we'll discuss later, Feyre has to justify being there with Tamlin, has to justify why she's probably going to die and end up dying for Tamlin. And that's, you can't really let yourself get into it too much when you realize the guy that you're gone under the mountain for is kind of a douche.
Yeah. Also, side note, he let her kill Andros.
Yeah. Tamlin just lets her do whatever she wants, minus freedom.
Yep, pretty much. I want to note also this idea that she has bile in her throat. Feyre's humanity is showing, and she feels sick at the sight of Clare's body. She's going to wet herself later on, and it's just all to remind us that she is the weakest organism in this room. None of the Feyre...
Organism? Not even the bacteria is as weak as her.
Not even the bacteria pities Clare, but Feyre does, and it makes her weak.
Despite of all of this, though, like, Feyre does overcome it. No one else shows that same humanity, right? The wetting themselves, the bile in their mouths, is that whatever, or in their throat. But she's the one who breaks the curse because all the other people, Faye, did nothing.
And I think that's an important point that is a theme in this book, and I think in this series, that Feyre as a human, as someone with a mortal heart in future books, experiences fear in a way that the Fae don't. And therefore, she is the only one capable of overcoming it.
Yep.
Because that's what her life has been about, is overcoming fear.
Yep. A very mortal core fear. Yeah.
Yep. So another thing about mortals is that they are beasts, according to Amarantha. And I think that this explains how she's capable of being so cruel to Feyre and to other Fae that she views as beneath her. They are something to be trampled upon. They're uncreative. Humans have stolen culture from Fae, who once taught them. And again, we see another mirror here where once Feyre was called a half-wild beast by Nesta. But Nesta's no longer the bad guy. She's been replaced by Amarantha, who I would say in this novel is the true and ultimate evil.
No one's going to fight you there. Amarantha is the true
Everything
ultimate
is up to interpretation. Someone might think Amarantha's the heroine here.
Please message us if you think Amarantha's the heroine. Like, she's just been done dirty here.
She really has, as you will note later on.
The fact that Amarantha just classifies Feyre as a beast and, so beneath her, love the double standards. Amarantha mentions Tamlin's claws and calls them lovely. So the Fae get to be wild, but the humans don't. Like, when the Fae are wild, it's lovely, but when the humans are wild, it's not. It's a lot of finger pointing, is what I'm saying.
It is a lot of finger pointing, and we continue to see that. So Amarantha says to Tamlin, "These human dogs can make our kind so lustblind that we lose all common sense." And what I love about this is that humans are to Fae what Fae are to humans. They're this distraction. Remember in chapter 2, chapter 3, the villagers called the children of the blessed whores because of their affinity for Fae. It's basically the same thing happening here.
We're back to slut shaming.
Slut shaming all day. Despite all of this, despite being called a beast, Feyre thinks back on her life and flips class on its head. And I find this moment very interesting. She believes that her poverty will work to her advantage. So despite that she might be the lowest class of human, despite the fact that the Fae around her might view her as a beast, she thinks, Amarantha tricked them all, but I hadn't survived poverty and years in the woods for naught. My best chance lay in revealing nothing about myself or what I knew. What was her court but another forest, another hunting ground?
The self-awareness here, the fact that Feyre recognizes that her weakness is her strength and that she's going to be able to use that. She's in her element now. She knows that this is when she's most like herself. But then, 5 seconds later, she goes back to being prey.
Right. And but that, I think you could argue, is where Feyre thrives.
Yeah. Oh, as being prey?
Yeah.
Ooh, I like it.
I just pulled that out of the hat. But I do think that is true. The irony here, though, is that while her experiences in poverty will help her in the first trial that Amarantha sets for her, it doesn't help her in the second trial. And that's without Amarantha knowing anything about her.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad. So throughout all of this, we are constantly getting bombarded with foreshadowing of Feyre dying. But despite all that, Feyre's ability to view court or the court under the mountain as another forest, I think really gives the reader hope that Feyre will survive because we believe in her as a hunter. I mean, think about chapter 1 Feyre, who is the hunter who is feeding her family, is feeding herself, is surviving at the spring court when she has no one on her side. Like, chapter 1 Feyre is present again, or at least the strength of chapter 1 Feyre. She has the skills that she once abandoned while she was happiest in the spring court. She has those back and equipped, and she's ready to rumble.
This is an evolved Feyre. This is character development. We have started, we have come to a middle, we've come to an end. That's storytelling.
Yeah, it is. And even though it feels like we've circled back, we really haven't, because the Feyre, as you said, has evolved. The Feyre.
V Feyre?
I said the Feyre.
Oh, it was
Feyre.
like version 5?
Version 6.0.
Yeah.
And we know this is an evolved Feyre because she acknowledges that the half of herself that thrived at the spring court can't be put to use right now. And sadly, it is among one of the last times we're going to see this side of her. She has to leave that thriving Feyre who likes to paint behind, and instead she's going to bring back this Feyre who thrives as prey. That small part of me, she thinks, that had again become trivial and useless, noted that the carvings weren't just ornate designs, but actually depicted fairies and high fae. This is not a typical color, texture, or light observation on Feyre's part because she's shutting that person down.
But, she's still able to use that artist side one last time here. Though lovely, she wasn't as devastatingly beautiful as I imagined. Wasn't some goddess of darkness and spite. She straight up called her ugly.
Burn.
And granted, Feyre does say to paint her is to drive her to madness. So really saying how ugly she is or how terrifying she is. But this is the first High Lady Fae that Feyre has met. And whenever Feyre's thought about like other High Lady Fae, she thinks about like Tamlin's past lovers and how beautiful they must be. And here she is about to die, straight up calling her ugly.
Which is really interesting because when you think of prey and predators are naturally designed to attract their prey. And Amarantha is not attractive.
That's funny. Yeah.
I don't know why that was irrelevant, but it was relevant in my brain. What we're going to see under the mountain, and I'm going to continue to bring up, is that Feyre is very human and relish these human moments because she's not going to have many of them left.
Nope.
As a human is prone to panic and crying in fear, and it makes her weak. And honestly, everything under the mountain is designed to make her feel weak and to make her seem weaker than the Fae around her. On page 305, she thinks, I couldn't panic. No, I had to keep my tears in check and had to keep my wits together. I had to survey the damage as best I could, then figure out what to do. I fought tears. They were pointless anyway. And it's so interesting, though, that compared to Tamlin, she is much, much stronger despite this fear because Tamlin is afraid and does nothing. Whereas Feyre is afraid and agrees to do these crazy-ass trials. And
Feyre, keeps questioning Tamlin, like, why he doesn't do anything. I would argue that when she asks herself that on page 313, it would imply not just under the mountain, but outside of the mountain. She has heard Tamlin say, I'll take care of this, or it is what it is kind of a thing. And he hasn't done anything. So there's a lot of vagueness here. like we said, Sarah J. Maas, that's her writing in order to make it vague for us. But it's, I think there's larger conversation happening in Feyre's head that we're not privy to.
I totally agree. And I think we're going to see that a lot in the next few episodes.
By the end of this chapter, though, when she's back in her prison on 314, she says, I knew better than to wish for Tamlin. And at this moment, she's extremely isolated. She probably, and I think I would say, feels like she's the only one fighting and resisting. She walks into this court under the mountain and everyone is just there looking pretty, eating, drinking, and she comes in ready to fight and no one else is doing that. So she's a one-man show at this point, a one-woman show, because it's stronger.
Women in this story are definitely stronger, and
in most stories.
And in most stories, that is very true. And I love that you mentioned how the Fae are just looking pretty, because they sure are. When Feyre has to sit in a cell, dirty and starving, all the Fae around her, despite being prisoners, are in rich clothing, they're clean and they're fed. And as I mentioned, everything under the mountain is set up to make her feel lesser than. So when she observes everyone was clad in rich, colorful clothing, all of them seeming clean and fed, I ask myself, would she have noticed this if she was also clean and fed? Probably not.
Yeah, especially after she's been living in comfort for months now.
Right, where being clean and fed was normal, and you don't make comments on people being clean and fed because everyone's clean and fed. You're clean and fed.
Yeah. This isolation, this separation from everyone else, this, being so different, being the other, it's really hitting Feyre hard, and she's beginning to lose her identity to Amarantha. She's handing her identity over. On 308, she says, a huntress, she, being Amarantha, was little more than an immortal, cruel huntress. Feyre has always described herself, maybe not in those exact words as huntress, but she is a huntress. She goes out and she gets food and all that stuff, and now she's given that title to Amarantha.
Because she now identifies as prey and not the hunter, she is in survival mode, and her wits come about her. She's trying to do all that she can to survive. She, at first, believes that there's no meal pattern to the food that she's given while she's in prison, but by the end of the chapter, realizes that there is a pattern and that she begins to work it out. And I think that this foreshadows that maybe she will survive. But really, right now, it's all about living moment to moment and surviving moment to moment for her.
And, as we keep saying, the old Feyre is back. And this is the Feyre who doesn't care what she's eating so long as she's eating. And that is a huge strength for her that she's pulling back out. And I want to definitely remind ourselves that just a few short chapters ago, Feyre was describing human food as ash. So now it's kind of like, what, moldy bread? Yes, please. Protein. Give it to me.
Yeah, such a great point, because she has abandoned that thriving version of herself who had everything. She doesn't have anything. And so she's going to do what she needs to do. Something happens in this chapter. I'm going to make a hard left turn because I don't have a segue.
Make that hard left.
I'm making the hard left. Feyre's name is an ancient Fey name. And so we've heard, or it's been alluded to previously, that Feyre means beauty. But we don't know where it comes from. And Amarantha comments that Feyre's name is an ancient Fey name. And on one hand, when I read this, I was like, oh, this is an indication she will bridge the gap between races. But on the other hand, I'm like, why has it never been brought up before?
It's a pretty important thing that no one's mentioned.
Yeah, and why is it Amarantha that brings it up?
Because Amarantha, as we were talking about it, because you're the one who mentioned it, Amarantha is starting to see Feyre as a real threat.
Yeah, and not only a real threat, Amarantha, I think, is the first Fae to actually take Feyre seriously.
I love this point so much that Amarantha is the one to discover that bridge, is make that link, and yeah, she's empowered Feyre. She's putting her on a somewhat even playing field.
Yeah, which is so interesting, and I think it's not insignificant that it's Amarantha, a female Fae, making this observation.
I love it. I just love it. I mean, and of course, it's foreshadowing. Feyre's about to become Fae, so there's that gap, but I like the other one more.
Yeah, I will say, when I heard Feyre's name for the first time, I was like, oh, she's going to become Fae.
Oh, yeah. That was like the least surprising part of the book.
Yeah, least surprising part. Oops, spoiler, if you haven't read to that point
I know,
in the
if you've
book.
been just like following along and reading chapter by chapter with us, sorry about all that.
Yeah, we've definitely been spoiling the book the whole way.
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like, my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
Let's not forget that her presence is here. She's here to make Feyre feel guilty. Feyre feels guilty. It's going to be constant. It's a constant theme here. While she's imprisoned, Feyre hears a whip crack, and the screaming built, hardly pausing for a breath. Clare had probably cried similarly. I had as good as tortured her myself. I deserved this, deserved whatever pain and suffering was in store.
Feyre is becoming depressed. Her mind is spiraling. It is going to the worst parts of herself, the darkest parts of herself, where this self-loathing, this hatred, this feeling like she belongs under the mountain and deserves all this. And you can't survive if you don't have a good mindset.
And I think Amarantha knows this. Why else does she imprison her where she imprisons her for so long? It's so that Feyre's worst enemy at this point is going to be her own mind. Mm-hmm. And I think Amarantha knows that.
Oh, yeah. We have to mention the riddle because this is when we discover the riddle. And I keep telling Amy, but I suck at riddles. I'm really bad at them. But the first time I read this, I was like, oh, yeah, it's love.
Yeah. And in my defense, I was listening to the book.
I was listening to it, too.
I distinctly remember brushing my teeth when the riddle came up, and I didn't go back and re-listen to it.
It was the most thing. It just halfway through the riddle, I was like, "Oh, it's love, it's love."
You're so smart.
No, I'm not there. I just would love to have been Feyre in that moment. Amarantha's in the middle of reciting it. It's love. Can we walk out now? Are we done?
You said instantaneously,
right?
So, chapter 36, we approach trial 1, and it's really interesting to me that as we begin these trials, Feyre works really hard to fight her human instincts or reactions so that she can better assimilate and put this tough front up in front of all the Fae. On page 317, every instinct, every bit of me that was intrinsically human seemed to run. but I kept my feet planted, locking my knees to avoid giving out.
Feyre is gone back to being the prey. She's given up this huntress idea. She's handed that over to Amarantha, and this is all build up for her turning Fae. When Amarantha discusses what she's learned about Feyre, she says on page 318, "Rhysand tells me you're a huntress," she said, and my heart faltered. He must have read my thoughts again. And I love this because he did read your thoughts. Rhysand can hear everything that Feyre is thinking. In later books, he talks about her being an open book. And what happened a chapter ago? She said that Amarantha was the huntress. So I really believe this is Rhysand stepping in and just reminding Feyre that no, she's the huntress. She's the one who has the skills to get through this. She is built to win.
I think that deserves finger snaps.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I loved that point. But going into this, despite this reminder from Rhys, everything else around Feyre is telling her that her life is not of value. She is bet on, just like humans bet on racehorses in animal fights. The Fae bet on her and whether or not she will live or how quickly she will die. And in response to this, I think she just becomes more animal-like.
But while all this betting is going on, Rhysand's the one who bets for her. And it's a way of saying that he's got her back. It's a peace offering. And even though Tamlin didn't bet on her, and not that he could bet on her, Rhysand being in her corner, it's that spark of hope. And that hope is what Feyre is now using to drive her to survive.
Yeah, I love that point. I think even if it's not a peace offering, it's something that, if nothing else, at some point, Rhysand's like, look, I believe in you. And when you look back on this, I hope you know that I believed in you.
I love it so much.
But back to Feyre being an animal. When she bests the worm, she looks at Amarantha and didn't check myself as I exposed my teeth. I would have ripped her throat out. Someday, if I lived through this, I would skin her alive.
Ooh.
I just imagine her wearing a dress made of skin.
Oh my God, that's not what I was imagining.
That's what I was imagining. So interesting here that some of Feyre's mannerisms are becoming more beast-like as a result of trying to put up this tough front. She is becoming violent, just like Tamlin, and thinks her violence is a proof of love and is proud of it.
She calls Tamlin my Tamlin in her head with ownership, like a Fae. And with Feyre becoming more Fae-like, more like a beast, she's becoming more Fae than Tamlin was even Fae.
Great. Tell me why.
Thank you. Oh, I had a quote. Oopsie, I had a quote here. On page 317, I ground my teeth and almost exposed them to her. Tamlin's face remained blank. To top it all off, even when Feyre is about to die and the giant worm is chasing after her, it's Lucien who warns her and is who saves her, not Tamlin.
Not Tamlin. It's never Tamlin. I guess in Tamlin's defense is although he's not doing anything now, when Feyre is dying and Tamlin has his powers back, he does rip out Amarantha's throat, which is something Feyre wanted.
When the live action happens, or the series that they do of this, I want that there.
I do too.
I want to see him ripping her throat out.
He stabs her in the head and then rips her throat out. It's a little excessive if you read it. He shoves a sword through her head and then rips her throat out.
I mean, I think it's better to be safe than sorry.
You know, I guess so. You never know with Fae.
You never know.
And so we proceed after the first trial. Feyre has succeeded. We move into chapter 37. And even though she should be high on winning, Feyre is reduced to nothing. Her reward for killing the worm is rotten food. And all it is intended to make her feel weaker than she already is.
In her mind, the Fae have already won. She is dead. She understands that she is dying.
Yeah, her arm is broken. It's probably infected. And we have this just overwhelming sense of illness and infection and weakness to remind us once again that she is lesser than the Fae. When Rhysand comes to visit her, he grimaces at the smell of her vomit. She tries to keep her injury hidden from him so that he can't see how weak she is. He comments on the fact that human bones don't heal at the same rate as Fae. He even talks about how she's unladylike because of her manners in her delirious state. And Feyre acknowledges that Lucien underestimated her in the past because of her humanity and is once again underestimating her ability to stay alive.
You know, without being willing to say it, Rhysand understands her in a way better than any of them, better than Tamlin or better than Lucien. I think if Tamlin understood how dire of a situation Feyre really was, maybe he would have begged, borrowed, and stealed to make sure that someone was down there checking in on her. But, you know, there's a certain amount of assumption when it comes to Feyre that she's tough enough and strong enough. But who gets it? Rhysand gets it.
And he is her savior, but he's really full of contradictions for someone who's supposed to be her savior. He's very soft with her at moments, and then like with whiplash is very brutal. And I have a couple quotes. "Let me see your arm," he said too quietly. And then later on, "Let me see it." A growl ripped from him. Without waiting for my reaction, he grabbed my elbow.
Knowing what we know, that they're mates, and he ends up falling in love with her way early on, as we have to add some, you know, background here. So later on in future books, Rhysand talks about how he knew Feyre before he even met Feyre. And he's being really harsh with her and physical in a way that we'll never see again. Do you think that he loves Feyre here? Because that's a hell of a way to act to someone you love.
I will answer that question, but let me read the other quote because I think it really speaks to the brutality you're talking about. "I'll make a trade with you," he said casually, and gently set my arm down. But then later on, swift as lightning, he lashed out, grabbing the shard of bone in my arm and twisting. Like, that's really violent. And so back to your question, I don't think that he loves her at this point. I think that he's been obsessed with this being that he's just now met. This being happens to be human. And is in love with another Fae. And I think he's really infatuated with her. And more than anything, I think he doesn't want her stubbornness to win. Because if he lets her stubbornness win, she dies. And there's no opportunity, A, to get to know her, B, to just ensure her survival. And I think survival is the most important thing right now.
I know what this moment is.
What is this moment?
So in literature and really in any form of media consumption, there is the male gaze. I think that's one of the most popular literary devices that people know of, or literary theories. And
but don't know. I think people know it, but don't know it's called the gaze. So what is this?
So the male gaze essentially is when a man sees a woman, has an idea of her, and she becomes what he imagines. Now, the really important thing about the male gaze is that it is shattered once he meets her. And we see this a lot of times in like beer commercials, right? Like he sees like a guy, like that's how I learned it in class. Like they would show clips of, you know, a man sees a girl from far away drinking a beer, and then it's, you know, oh, she's amazing, comes up close, and it's like, nope, not what he dreamed it. And Rhysand has been imagining Feyre from far away for a while, and the 2 times that he met her before, she was weak, right? She was being attacked by those other Fae, or in the second time, she was cowering behind Lucien. So for the first time in these moments, this is the breaking of the male gaze. And of course he's going to be angry because the male gaze is broken. She's not what he imagined.
I love that. Also, I female gaze all the time. I imagine a guy to be a certain way, and then I really get to know him, and I'm like, oh, you're nothing like I imagined.
My entire bachelor's dissertation goes into the female gaze, and I guess it's like been published, but I talk about how the female gaze comes from a point of view of survival rather than the male gaze coming from a point of view of lust.
Interesting.
We'll talk about it more after.
Love it. So this romanticized image of who he thought Feyre to be, at least on Rhysand's part, is completely shattered. I mean, she's human, she's weak, she's in love with Tamlin, who's like Rhysand's worst enemy right now. And how do we justify that?
Oh, actually, this goes into what I was just saying with the female gaze. It comes from a point of survival. That's what Feyre is doing right now to Tamlin. She is female gazing Tamlin so hard.
Yes, she is.
There is an understanding that yes, Tamlin may not be able to show his love or even interest for Feyre, but I want to point out that he is willing to beg for Lucien's life after Lucien speaks up for Feyre. And Feyre is female gazing him.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's about survival, right? And she's at this point where she sees herself as a possession worth selling just for Tamlin's sake. For Tamlin, I would sell my soul. I would give up everything I had to free him. And it's crazy that she's gotten to this point, because if you think about it, that's exactly what Tamlin needed from her from the start, like with this whole breaking of the curse.
Yep.
Which begs the question, like, is this her choice?
Well, in the human world, right, Feyre was ready to move on from Tamlin. I mean, she was heartbroken, sure, but she was ready to paint again. She had her sisters. She was like Stella get her groove back mode. But now that she's under the mountain, now that she's facing all of these trials, she's become more obsessed with him. She's willing to sell her soul. She's willing to go to hell and back for him. And that's not the kind of love we had before. But of course she has to go there and she has to female gaze him because what's the point if she's not that level of obsessed in love with him?
Right. Like, why is she suffering this much? Why is she willing to sacrifice herself if she's not head over heels for this guy? Which I would argue she wasn't, as you said.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's to continue the point, she views Tamlin as having done everything for her now.
Nah.
She doesn't even recognize what she's done for herself. The quote specifically is, "And Tamlin had done so much for me, for my family. Even if he had lied about the treaty, about sparing me from its terms, he'd still saved my life that day against the Naga and saved it again by sending me away from the manor." So I would like to point out, Feyre also killed half of the Naga herself before Tamlin showed up. Also, despite helping her with her family and sending her back, doesn't excuse the lies about the treaty and whatever he did to bring her to the Spring Court. And further, if he really didn't want her to come back to save him, he could have told her about the treaty and about his lies before he sent her back to the human world so that she would be so angry with him she wouldn't want to come back. And so I have to ask, was it all a test on Tamlin's part?
It was like a really failed Lassie go away moment. It's a go away, but I love you, but you should go. Come back for me.
Yeah, kind of, right?
I also want to go back a bit to your Naga point that she killed half the Naga. Also, Lucien did admit he was on his way to come save her. She would have survived without Tamlin.
Yeah, even if Lucien had hesitated, which he did.
But he was on the way. And yeah, it's a failed Lassie. Go away, come back. He can't even get that right.
You know, he's so half-assed. As we end this chapter, Feyre makes a bargain with Rhysand to ensure her survival, because nobody else is ensuring her survival. And as she realizes that this bargain comes with a tattoo, because it's on her now, she anticipates Tamlin's anger when he sees it. And I would say that this is really concerning and very indicative of at least an emotionally abusive relationship. She thinks on page 336, Tamlin, I could already see his face going pale, his lips becoming thin as the claws came out. I could almost hear the growl he'd emit when he asked me, what had I been thinking? He doesn't show this version of himself to anyone else, especially those who he should be defending Feyre from. Instead, he only shows this version of Tamlin to the weak, defenseless human that is Feyre.
My note next to your note is, that's a really good fucking point. I love it. I love that you brought that to our attention because, you know, he doesn't really show his claws to other people. I think he shows it to Rhysand, but Rhysand kind of laughs at it. But who does he show it to? Who takes it seriously? Feyre.
Only Feyre takes it seriously.
Yeah, I know. It's true. I think Feyre and Lucien are the only ones who are like, oh, this is serious mode. And even Alice is like, whatever, he's being a bitch.
Yeah, kind of. So as we wrap up this episode, I just want to note that now that the bargain has been made, Feyre's interactions with Rhys versus Tamlin are going to look different. And it's only going to progress from here. This is a major turning point, and I cannot wait to discuss it.
Oh, 2 more episodes left. But, you know, since we're at the very end, these breadcrumbs are becoming crummier and crummier. You're not crummier. They're great breadcrumbs. You're just not getting many. And I'll give you the first one. So Alice tells Feyre before she goes under the mountain, you'll be lucky if she gives you a clean death. Correct. Like, she does not get a clean death.
And upon meeting Amarantha, Feyre thinks, and as I stared into her black eyes, I realized I was going to die.
You're not wrong.
Not wrong. And finally, I mean, there's a lot more references to Feyre dying, but I think it's interesting that while she's imprisoned, she thinks, wait, had the conditions of my trial been different from those of the riddle? She'd emphasized immediately. Maybe she meant she would not free us immediately after I finished her trials. That she would take however long she wanted. No, I was just being paranoid.
She does say, I'll think about that later.
And then she
But I know, but I've never relate. I mean, I've always relate to Feyre in different moments, but I also really relate to that of like, wait a minute, here's a serious, concerning thought. Nope, we're going to push this far away and not deal with it.
You know, I think it's interesting you point that out because I think as readers, we push it aside as well because this is before all the trials begin. And so we get so engrossed in the trials and Feyre staying alive. I think we forget this condition.
Yep.
At least I did.
Let's answer some questions.
Let's answer some questions. So the first question we had today, as a reader, do we have faith in Feyre? And I think Sarah J. Maas really does a good job of making us doubt because Feyre doubts herself.
I mean, this is why, like, part of the reason why we chose this book is because when we were discussing it, both of us had the impression of first time reading it, walking away saying, was it even believable that Feyre won? Like, that's kind of like she was really reaching there.
Yeah, and I think it's because of this moment right here is like we've already established that Feyre is a strong huntress. Like we have exhausted many episodes convincing you of that. But it's this right here is what is the last taste of human Feyre you have.
And Sarah J. Maas leaves a bad taste in our mouth.
Yes. Very much so. And we doubt her and she doubts herself.
The other question that we had was, do we believe Tamlin has done everything he can to protect Feyre? And I would like to call this the Tamlin paradox because we have to give him another little inch here. He can't, even Rhysand says that Tamlin can't come down to the dungeons to help her because everyone is watching him. But is he doing everything for her?
You know, like I said earlier, if he really didn't want her to come back to Feylands, like, yeah, he made her fall asleep so she couldn't see the way back. But he didn't anger her enough to make her stay away. Is he trying to protect her? Sure, I'll give him that. But I don't think he's doing everything he could have done.
Oh, I mean, I also feel like there aren't any signs that he's working behind the scenes too, you know? Like, Lucien says when he goes down to like fix Feyre the first time that he's doing it for the sake of Tamlin, not because Tamlin asked him to.
Good point.
Like, Tamlin could have been like, hey, Lucien, send this note along. Tell her I love her. Tell her, like, I'm sorry she's here. None of that happened.
You know what, Tamlin?
We're also going to throw out, kind of reference back the theme that we had here and mirroring. And part of mirroring is growth, right? It's a lot of throwback to earlier and to present. And I think that we go more into the loss of identity. We lose Feyre's identity, right? She's starting to lose her identity as the huntress. Tamlin's losing his identity. Feyre's seeing him in a different light. And even Rhysand's going to lose his identity in a way that the identity that Feyre gives him.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think also from this point on, we're going to see a lot of Feyre's interactions with Rhysand are going to mirror early interactions with Tamlin. And I think this is important for how the relationships progress from here, for how they are built and how they are taken down.
Yep. So thank you for listening to this week's episode of Book Talk for Book Talk. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platforms. Next week, we will be exploring chapters 38 through 41 of A Court in Thorns and Roses.
We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our form at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a weekly mini episode.
If you are enjoying the podcast, visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and to learn about supporting the show through Patreon, Ko-Fi, or Venmo.
Or find us on TikTok and Instagram at the handle booktalkforbooktalk.
Bye.
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.